Hey, Bat family. Welcome to another episode of The Games That Made Us. This time it's my turn to recall some history, and we're going to be talking the Omega virus. If you don't know, the Omega virus came out in 1992 from Milton Bradley and designer Michael Gray. I didn't actually know his name until doing a bit of research for this mini episode, because of course they didn't actually credit people on the boxes at the time. But interestingly, it looks like he also ended up designing Electronic Mall Madness in 1989 and Electronic Dream Phone in 1991, which is both hilarious and it's also an interesting road to understand how they got to the Omega virus. It's also funny because I know that Natalie loved both of those games and would probably still play both of them with no hesitation. The Omega virus itself was incredibly far ahead of its time. Set on a fictional space station called Battlesat 1, the mustache-twirlingly evil Omega virus is attempting to take over the station and use its resources to attack the Earth. Using a big electronic interface that you would type in basic codes with, the game itself would track the game state for each player, as well as taunt you and waste time the way the Gatekeeper does in Atmosphere. The amount of times I have been called human scum in my life is not insignificant because of the virus. Each player is engaging in essentially a set collection game of trying to track down all of the access cards and the equipment needed to defeat the virus. At the beginning of the game, each player is also going to put in a secret 2-digit code that if they hear after being in a particular room in a sector during the gameplay, that's actually telling you where the virus is going to be if that sector is still open. As the game progresses, though, the virus is going to be fighting back. It can destroy your equipment, it might teleport you all the way across the station, it can even shut down entire sectors of the board, meaning that not only does the playable area shrink, but so do the spots the virus and all of your equipment can be hiding in. The game is in that old school coffin box that all those big games came in at that time, and I remember opening it up on Christmas Day and losing my mind about it. It had this beautiful dynamic art of the virus attacking the space station and the space marine that was running from an exploding console nearby. The game itself has a gorgeous presentation that so few other games of that time, or honestly for a very long time to come, really had. Big chunky minis for the space marines and their probes. You could take weapon attachments that you would find and you would clip them to the back of the marines themselves. These really super cool folding player boards that would clip onto the edge of each sector of the board. They acted as a comprehensive player aid. They had slots for the access cards when you found them to hang in so you could physically flip through them and see them. But it also meant that when a sector closed down, you would literally fold the thing and you would close off part of the board. It was just so stinking cool. The electronic interface that sat in the middle of the board also allowed for players to enter in not only how many people are playing, but depending on your player count and the difficulty selected, it also adjusted the timer for how long the game would actually go. Because the Omega virus is a real-time game, and unlike many real-time games of that era, it wasn't a game of just rolling a bunch of dice and trying to hit a timer or a bell or something. Additionally, because of the way you could plug in the players, it also meant that you could just play as a solo player. At a time when solo gaming was not even a remote thought of the vast majority of people, this one offered it. As the youngest of 3 kids, the one that was the most obsessed with board games and sci-fi and all these things, and I had a hard time getting my siblings to play with me just because of our age differences and we were in different stages of life and all that. It was hard to get people to play, and so I had this game that I could play against. And I could do it on my own, and I would have such a fun time with it. I just would get lost in this game for hours on end. The rulebook itself, the first half of it was just a thematic story comic as well, and I remember thinking that was also super cool. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's why I ended up having to get a PDF and download and replace my rulebook, because I am sure that I took that rulebook with me and I read that comic over and over constantly as a kid. I can directly trace so many of my gaming tastes, and honestly, preferences for media in general, back to this game. It has what could reasonably be construed as a horror theme. It's in space, has high modularity and replayability. It has that solo mode. In fact, it also is one of the earliest examples of a semi-cooperative game, because even though only one person could technically win, you would end up just playing it where you're just trying to defeat the virus, because if the virus won, if the timer ran out and you hadn't destroyed it, everybody lost. Because of that, the game is this dynamic and very emergent storytelling engine. Because of the way the virus would react, it would start to get panicked as you started getting all of your equipment, and it would taunt you more and would try to waste as much time as it possibly could. It had all these things, and it just added up to a game that, quite honestly, I will still play at a moment's notice. There are very few games in my collection that I treat with more reverence than this one, because other than one disruptor being missing, my copy is still entirely complete and still fully functioning. I know that Restoration Games has a license for the Omega Virus, and they've said they are working on a new version of it. I am simultaneously very excited about that fact, but also a little frustrated because I know that they're going to replace that big electronic interface thing, most likely with an app. And that'll make it easier to run, and it will give it more dynamism and the ability to do more scenarios or potentially turn it into a campaign game. There's a lot of benefits to it, but there's some joy about having that big thing sitting in the middle, that's where you pull your weapons off of, and you draw your access cards out of it, and you load your probes into and off of it. It was such a cool component that just was so unique for the time. And I know that Restoration will probably end up doing something cool with it, but that nostalgia for me really does color my opinion of what could potentially be coming. There is a very small box game they released in 2021 called the Omega Virus Prologue, and it is another real-time game. But other than that, and the fact that it carries across that blue and red and yellow color scheme for the keys and everything, it really doesn't have anything at all to do with the larger game. That said, there is a card in the box that links you back out to omegavirus.com, and that page just reads, "The prologue is just the beginning, human scum," and I have been near obsessively checking that page ever since. It hasn't been updated since it originally came out, and it's got me concerned that Restoration may have a dead project on their hand. I really hope not. We just have heard nothing about it. But considering what they were able to end up doing with Return to Dark Tower, I can only hope for the best, because this is such an important and close to my heart game. At this point, I know the Omega Virus is dreadfully hard to find. Between it being over 30 years old and having such a small print run and so many components and things within it, and the fact you just need the central piece to still work. But if you can find it, it is one of the best games of its era. It is a genuine joy to play, and it is such an impressive piece of design from a historical perspective. It is so worth trying to find and play. I've said it a couple times already, and I know that I have that mass nostalgia and love for it because it was so integral to who I was as a kid. But if I am really, truly looking at the games that made me, I cannot possibly ignore the importance of the Omega Virus.